Good morning in the United States, good afternoon in Riga, and hello to everyone who's tuning in. My name is Eli Nelange-Onatamishvili, and I'm here to welcome you to NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence LinkedIn livestream. We will feature a discussion between Jānis Sārts, who is the director of NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, and Sinead Bowell, a futurist and entrepreneur, who is joining us from the United States. Thank you both for being here. The impact of emerging technologies on how societies interact, process information, and also perceive the world can be exciting and I guess at times also quite daunting, depending on whether you are a tech optimist or pessimist. So today we will discuss the future of information environment, a topic which we also bring to the Munich Security Conference later this year. And I'd like to start by asking both of you, what is your relationship with technology? Do you consider yourself a pessimist or an optimist? And perhaps you could also add what has recently surprised you in the tech world. Sinead, let's start with you, please.
Sure. So my relationship with technology, as you had mentioned, I am a futurist. So I track emerging and exponential technologies very closely, from AI to hardware to biology. And then I tend to engage with them actually at a systems level, so often as infrastructure, to understand how they reshape business models, economies, institutions, security, and societal resilience. In terms of what has stood out to me lately, I mean, there's the pace technology is moving, but equally as stunning is the pace it is being adopted. So when you look at a technology like artificial intelligence, because language is the primary interface to engage with these systems, the learning curve is actually quite flat. So on the one trajectory, you have advancing capabilities, and then you also have equally as accelerating adoption, which is quite stunning to see. In terms of, am I an optimist or a pessimist? I wouldn't say I'm either of those things. I really am a futurist, and I think if I commit to one side or the other, I may miss what the horizon is actually showing. But if I didn't think the optimistic scenarios were possible, I don't think I'd be able to do this work. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, yeah, I guess as a futurist, you have to be both to think of all the possible scenarios, right? The good ones and the daunting ones. Jāni, what about you? Pessimist, optimist? In my experience, I think you're quite an optimist.
Am I? Okay, that's interesting. Well, first and foremost, I probably would say that I am fascinated by technology. And I think, in a way, I'm fascinating in a sense that what is becoming possible. And if you think from a context of a human history, I think it's like, is it a new developmental leap? Which is, if I'm an optimist. But because I've spent most of my life in a national security in different roles, I tend to first think of a worst case scenarios. And that is, of course, where a lot of pessimism dawns on me. And I think the best way to describe it is, I think we have to be realistic that both of these things will be real. We'll have both. There's never like clean cut. And when I think of that, that's why we're having this discussion, is because what we do today matters of what will be tomorrow, and the actions of our current societies will determine, how much of a bad and how much of a good we will see in few years' time.
Well, actually, about the scenarios, what you mentioned, our center released a report today, NextGen Information Environment, where we sketch out some of these scenarios. We are also going to discuss it at the Munich Security Conference in exactly 1 week's time. But this is an opportunity to give the first insights to people who are interested. Perhaps, Jāni, you can say a few words why you thought this project was important to do, how it came about, and what were you hoping to achieve with this report?
Well, I've been doing this work for quite a long time, looking at the way information space has been used by hostile state actors to attack democracies. And one thing that I always observed is we're kind of behind on the defensive, learning new thing that they've done. And part of what is in that landscape is that technology, primarily social media back in the day, enabled much of that. And now, with AI coming in and transforming even more fundamentally, the humans will be processing information, creating perceptions of the realities. I understood that we have to, one for once, turn the tables around, think of what the future is likely to be, and from that base point, prepare for that eventuality so that we have all what it requires to win in this contested environment, especially now since the geopolitics is once again at the forefront of the global stage, which I think brings more urgency to the subject. But also, from a military's thinking, you never prepare a weapon system to the battlefield you see today. You always think in a future, and then you start construct what is required to that in that future battlefield to succeed. And that's the two kind of approaches I think we're trying to merge today to discuss that future so that it educates our current choices. That's why we will discuss it in Munich with the policymakers.
Thank you, Yanis. Shinit, you had the opportunity to look through the report even before it was published. So, from your perspective, did any points stand out, maybe surprise you, or you felt something was lacking there? Can you maybe give your feedback? What were your initial reactions?
I think, there are 2 points that really stood out to me. There were several, but there were two that I would like to highlight. The first is the very real future that we might have to confront, where AI systems become the most trusted actors in an information environment. And that's quite a stunning line to read and quite a stunning future to grapple with. But the report highlights the kind of two primary forces that could to drive us to that. First, we have this hyper personalization that fragments reality. So, as AI systems tailor content to each and every one of us, adapting in real time to where we are in any given moment, we start to inhabit these parallel but completely individualized reality. And we start to actually expect that level of customization and autonomy. So it becomes much more challenging to go back to a shared kind of centralized level of trust and institutionalized central authority when you get more accustomed to autonomy and customization and information that's delivered for you. And secondly, as AI systems continue to author and co-author information, and we become quite delirious to what is human generated and what is synthetic, you do emerge towards a world where AI becomes a more trusted actor because that's the actor that you're used to, and that's the actor that's continuously serving you. So I think that that's a very real future that we have to grapple with. We sometimes assume that the future is an extension of the present, where an institution would be the central system of authority, but that could severely be challenged. The second thing that really stood out to me in the report, while we may be familiar with the idea of AI systems starting to author information for influence using targeted narratives, we're also stepping into a future where AI systems won't just be used to influence humans directly, but also other machines, right? So we end up in this kind of algorithmic competition landscape where machines are trying to out manipulate other machines long before information reaches us or we even have visibility into that. That means we're essentially going to end up in a world that's operating at AI speed. And this isn't an accelerated present, faster email, faster social media. It's a paradigm where the future collapses into the present because everything's done by prediction and simulation across many different futures. And then the most influential one kind of tries to outcompete the other machine. So it's a very different environment that we're going to need to build very different tools to defend democracy within.
Sinead, I think it is very interesting that you pointed out that there's a human habit to extrapolate the known present into the future, and it's probably one of our biggest logical flaws. Is that, and what I found out in these discussions that we had so far on these subjects, that when we try to think about the future, we mostly end up musing what is already possible and what is already kind of happening as if it is a future, and therefore kind of not having even an imagination to think about the future. And we just had this talk with you about the fact that we also included neural technologies as one of the remits of the future information space that might change a lot of elements, how we understand what is influence, how it is happening. But I think most people underappreciate that it is not a science fiction picture that we're painting. So, what do you think? How far away we are from neural technologies being a factor in the influence operations in the information processing?
I think we're actually already here. So neural technologies and including brain-based data into the information ecosystem, some may see that as brain chips or brain-computer interfaces, which would take a longer time for the masses to adopt. That's not what we're discussing. Neurotechnologies that are wearable devices. So this is a device that you would maybe put in your ears. You could listen to music, or you could also send different communications using thoughts. This is Meta's EMG wristband that is available today, that is constantly training an AI system on what your muscular movements indicate and what you're trying to do. So I don't think we're far away from it at all. I think that that's actually the present. And as that famous line, the future is always here, it's just not evenly distributed. That is the reality that we're operating in. So I think we do have to, and as the report says, move to the edge of what's possible and challenge our mental models. Because neural technologies mean new types of information are going to exist. So the same way the camera invented video as a new information format, there will be entirely new types of information that come into existence that we're going to need to understand from multiple vantage points, and to not just get into the habit of extrapolating the present into the future. The future isn't a faster present. It isn't the same behaviors now just with AI. It's an entirely different industrialized economy. Nothing will be recognizable, and that's what we have to be willing to think through. And that's where I think scenario planning is also key, because it forces you to ask what if questions and to really break free of just that extrapolation. And so, yeah, I mean, if you also look at the capital flows from all of the major smartphone providers and new entrants into the wearable space, most of them are pointing towards neural technologies and the brain being the operator of the keyboard, the brain replacing typing. So that's already here, and there are actors that are building the capabilities to interpret brain-based data and applying AI to that brain-based data. And that's an entirely different level of simulation. It's no longer just modeling, clicking on a phone or typing or subscribing. It's modeling what we are thinking and using AI to anticipate what we will do next. And even with large language models tend to take up a lot of space, but the next step is large action models. So now you have an environment that brain-based neural data is kind of penetrating into the space of consciousness and what we're thinking. And you combine that with a large action model to predict what a human will do next. That's an entirely different sphere. And it also means, I mean, when we think about democratic resilience and how people are going to respond to information, we actually have to now consider a new unit, not just the human who may be influenced by false information, but a human AI dyad, a person who uses AI to interpret the world around them. And what does influence look like in that sphere?
Yeah, I think that's quite a remarkable picture you're painting. And to me, from the report, I kind of was taken by two things, and I think that's where we also really have to be very conscious of understanding the implications. So first, in a way, very simple and punchline like, but the fact that seeing doesn't constitute believing. Like the way our perception systems means you see, therefore it's real. We're entering the world where this connection is destroyed. What's the implications? The other one is that we are addressing a system that is capable of transforming the way human beings connect ontologically to the world outside themselves in the century. So actually, apart from, just cognitive warfare, that is our area, very, very key, deep fundamentals are about to change. And to me, the question is like, A, how to align these changes to the basic principles of why we think democracy is the key and best way of human governance, which is freedoms, rights, choices. And I think none of that is granted in these new ecosystems. And second, um, how to uh, see that in a context of authoritarian versus democratic, and prepare the ecosystems in a way that in this battle, because I have a very clear idea that some of that technology, and we see evidence of it already emerging, are being used by those who are in an authoritarian mindset for the control. It's just the scale of the controllability will be way, way, way different. And that's like, I think the thing that we really have to think about is how and what should we do today so that tomorrow is best option, the optimistic one, not the one, the pessimistic. What do you think we should do?
Yeah, I liked how you phrased that about democracy, because you don't defend democracy just by declaring that it's an important pillar, and that it is the institution worth fighting for. You also have to operationalize that in the new reality, and environment that is emerging. So, what does it mean to safeguard democracy in a world with agentic architecture, or in a world with these new wearables, or in a world where reality itself needs to be defended? I think that that is key. And what are authoritarian regimes doing with these technologies? How are they moving? It's an entirely different ecosystem, right? From open source, to software as a new soft power. So, I mean, one of the things that the report highlighted that I thought was important, is new interdisciplinary groups to grapple with this. There's no one industry that is best positioned to understand this environment in its entirety. You're going to need researchers, you're going to need people who understand the business models that are being developed, people with deep technical expertise, as well as people who understand how that gets translated into policy. So when you have these interdisciplinary scenarios, then you can really make sure that you're thinking about the environment in its entirety. You also can't protect against the futures you haven't anticipated. So that means bringing anticipatory governance into the sphere of understanding, and defending, using scenario planning to model out the optimistic scenarios, not just the incremental change scenarios, but the absolute catastrophic ones. And then that's how you build resilience against all of those different realities. And I liked how you brought up the optimistic scenarios, because you also do need a long-term vision of what future you're moving towards. So we do talk a lot about the futures we don't want to inhabit and we want to defend against, but we also need to declare the long horizon view of where are we going? What do we want from this technology? What does it mean not just to defend democracy, but to strengthen it? And if those futures aren't declared, you really can't steer towards them. And again, that does also require that very long horizon view. This is not a technology, this is not a tool. And that's one thing that I'm trying to get policymakers out of the habit of referring to AI as a tool. AI is not a tool, it is infrastructure. It is an industrial size transformation that the likes of which we could compare to something like the printing press, but as we had discussed, a printing press every 2 weeks, as you had mentioned. So this is far beyond any tool for productivity. So going to the edge of what that means in terms of a transformation, declaring the futures that you want, and understanding how you operationalize that. Because the future really is decisions that are made in the present. We can see it. So what decisions are you making today that steer you away from the catastrophic scenarios that you have to admit could happen, and towards the more plausible ones? But I would also, or optimistic ones, turn that to you. What do you think we should be doing in this moment from your vantage point? One, from your vantage point of understanding where policymakers and decision makers are in this moment, and how they are dealing with and processing the changes that are coming from hardware to software. And two, where do you think we're not paying enough attention? Where the capabilities on the democratic side need to be developed? I mean, how are you seeing this moment?
I think first you really nailed it. We need an optimistic future vision, and the visions we have right now come from the clearly only from technologists. There's no policy people that think in terms of optimistic future with all the change and technology coming and happening as we speak. We mostly have in a policy area people trying to find a way how to present to conserve the present, and that is of course one of the reasons we feel it's not adequate, and I think that is key missing piece. And of course the problem is how detached much of the policy making is from the technological world. The knowledge of what is coming is very limited. In Munich we'll have two presidents actually join our discussion. One will be Latvian President Rinkevich, and the other will be the Finnish President Stubb. And these are few of the leaders, at least that I know of, that could engage in free flowing debate about that with a deep enough knowledge. And that's a rarity, unfortunately. So I'd say probably one of the reasons this report is made is to actually focus of the need of policy not adaptation, it's fundamental change of understanding what technology brings. It's not only about productivity, it's not only about just like information exchange. That this is foundational societal change happening in a very unfortunate geopolitical conflict situation. So not a very, and that is therefore I think the thing that we need really to do. Second, and I think a report mentions that short-term approach when we deal with these kind of things doesn't really deliver, and kind of just responsive to the most recent kind of thing that popped up is not delivering it. And in a way, it's also kind of tying back to your original point that what is the future vision and how we have the idea that what is happening, what we're doing today, and the choices we're making are aligning to that future vision. And unfortunately, these decisions are not made right now by the people that are running the policies. These are not done by the people that are elected. They are happening elsewhere. Is it good or is it bad? I'm not sure, but certainly there has to be some more common agreement. Will it be possible? I'm sure I'm more prone to wear my pessimistic hat. It will take a major crisis, unfortunately, in my view, to really rethink our approaches. But of course, we can always try to push it in that direction. Certainly, I think we have to far more uh, emphasize that change across all of the societies, also in when we engage. Because here we look at the context of security, but like education, workforce, all medicine, like name it, all of that is getting transformational, and I think that is where it is really really important. But like going away from these kind of very generic considerations, we're trying also in the report to list out some of the things that we have to, more practically to look at, et cetera, et cetera. You already mentioned the ability to run these scenarios probably synthetically. What would be the other things that you would be thinking that to-do list for the next year if you are in a omnipowered policy policy seat? What would be those that you would do?
I think investing in the alternatives that you want to see, right? So I think democratic institutions, and even if they move slow, even if policymakers move slowly, we're not helpless, right? So how can you use the power of the state to fund alternatives, to fund actual, whether that's different versions of AI systems that are much more transparent, that are auditable, to fund an ecosystem that's aligned with the values that you believe are important to uphold. And that means getting into the capital mix. That means backing and taking bets. That means using more 21st century infrastructure to start to facilitate the technologies of the future that work in a way that's aligned to the values that you want to uphold. I think that's quite important. I think, as you mentioned, education, there are all of these different facets of the environment that are going to change. So how do you use these tools to your advantage? The report talked about using the idea of gaming as a way to bring in the public to test different ideas and have communities weigh in on different ideas, leveraging simulations to model different futures to understand the most desirable ones. This means really getting in the nitty gritty of the technology itself and bringing those capabilities inside the house. I think are key. And making sure if you want to make sure you have oversight over the ecosystem that's being built, some of it is in your domain. It's really hard to control and influence an ecosystem or an AI stack that you have no leverage in. So that does mean making the financial investments. That does mean making sure that the policy environment is favorable both to the safety of the people, but also to experimentation, to startups. So it really is building a 21st century policy environment for this entirely new age. I think that those are key areas. And that is going to involve taking risk, right? Anytime you're going to invest in a technology that you want to bring to life, there will be some winners, there will be some losers. But that is the environment that we're in, because right now, most of the physical capabilities that we've been describing are almost entirely in the hands of the private sector. And that's this kind of third actor in all of this, right? So you have the democratic countries and policymakers, you have authoritarian regimes, but then you also have non-state actors that have outsized influence. And as it stands today, most of this infrastructure is being built by a private sector who doesn't report to the public. They have fiduciary duties to their shareholders. So if you want to provide alternatives, you also have to invest in them. So I think that those would be some areas that I would recommend. What about you?
Well, I think first I would agree the kind of thinking through the lens of infrastructure. I think also in the report that is a few times kind of mentioned that with what is coming, unless you have one or another way of controlling infrastructural elements, you're pretty much on the receiving end of things, and there's no other option. And I think that is where we have to think more in these kind of structural terms, not only like only the elements, but who and how controls the infrastructure, what are the transparencies, what are the checks and balances, and etc. The second thing I'm really thinking about is regulation, because of course for many people, well, what should we do? Write a law about it, like make it go away, forbid it, etc., etc. And I think I'm increasingly, and some that's also related to some part of the work that we've done as a center, relative to some recent regulations, for instance, by EU. I increasingly see the regulatory frameworks as we've seen them, as is our usual way of regulating, is not actually working. And I'm increasingly inclined to think, and there's a problem, like our regulatory process is very slow, is tedious, and then it goes into the details, and it is not able to address the like printing machine being invented every 2 weeks. It's just not designed that way. So I think unless we redesign regulatory process, we will be very hard pressed to match the way we govern things and etc. with the technology. And that leads me a bit more to kind of where can we drive the inspiration. So I think we as biological organisms, we're also governed, but we're governed differently by different sets of biological mechanisms, hormones, chemical processes, and etc. That drives really significantly our behavior. So how about changing the way we regulate through introducing these regulatory processes, kind of like hormones or something, into the AI systems or the systems we're developing so that they would, and I like this parallel, to exhibit this nurturing behavior that parent has to a child. But instead of saying that you should do it, that not necessarily works even from parent to child, but actually instilling these kind of internal inbuilt, and I don't think it is a chemical system as it is for us, but something different. But we have to adjust, and I would say that is also another kind of urgent line of inquiry. I think some people also have suggested that we need to go for separate a regulatory AI, but I'm not sure how that kind of falls out, because then if that happens, that your regulatory AI is not as capable as the one that he want or we wanted to regulate, then I don't think it is kind of looking very well. Sinead, what do you think? Okay, we had generative models with us, like publicly, easily available for 3 years. What do you think? What we will see happening for most ordinary people relative to AI and new technologies in 3 years from now? What will be the capabilities and what these technologies would be possibly capable of in 3 years now? So double the life cycle of the current system.
What will they be capable of? I think we will evolve from, and I had mentioned this a little bit, the large language models and generative AI to large action models, so systems that can really predict the next action a human will take. These will converge with world models, so models that much more understand the physics of the world, can simulate the world, which really expand their capabilities. This will combine with sensors, so whether that's sensors in our wearables, sensors in different robotics, to have AI systems that are really kind of these living systems alongside us, kind of adapting in real time. I think, I mean, a lot of people talk about we're moving towards a future where we won't be able to distinguish what's real and what's fake. That's already here. I don't think the average person can outsmart a supercomputer on any sort of synthetic media, at least not a person that I've met to date. But we're going to move towards much longer horizon type of synthetic content, and these kind of full world constructed narratives that will include an audio environment, a visual environment, all sorts of different types of information that come into one. I think the horizon of tasks that AI will be able to complete coherently is also going to extend. So right now, an AI system, you could ask it to do something, and the more work that requires, or the longer term engagement that task actually takes, the more confused the AI tends to get. I think we have to expect that to slowly go away, and eventually AI becomes much more capable. I also think it means challenging our mental models to recognize what we see as constraints today and challenges do not just inherently persist into the future. So a lot of times you hear, well, LLMs or generative AI makes a lot of mistakes. It's prone to hallucinations. That is a variable. That is not a constant into the future. And so a world where that variable gets solved and that constraint gets overcome means adoption accelerates. So then you have businesses taking on these systems faster, and they really do become our entire environment. And I think in 3 years, we will start to see what it really means for AI to be a general purpose technology where we stream it the way we stream electricity, where we expect it to be everywhere. And then I'd say the final thing, voice is really the easiest and most natural way to interact with these systems. So that means our behavior is also going to start to change. Right now, we're used to an environment where we open a phone and we manually tap and scroll and see something. We are probably moving towards an environment where we put a device in our ears, like the AirPods I have right now, and we converse maybe with a human, maybe with an AI system. And that becomes the default setting. So we really move into this AI environment in this kind of symbiotic movement. And I think that that's what we'll probably see. And I suppose the final thing is the beginning of the agentic infrastructure that we are operating on. So right now, we are still the primary users of the internet. It's getting redesigned for an environment where AI agents converse and interact with one another, and we are the end user of that environment. And that's an entirely different information ecosystem. So I think in 3 years, that starts to become much more apparent, where you just tell an AI agent what you need, and the rest is an ecosystem that gets carried out in that we don't have as much visibility into if we're not designing that visibility now. What do you think becomes possible in 3 years?
Well, first and foremost, I think you very much said that what I've quoted from the report is that the device you're using is the world you're seeing, is going to happen in 3 years' time. So not much time to prepare for that. That's an interesting one. The other one I also fully agree is the pace and adaptation. I think most of the discussions I've attended on the adaptation to AI pretty much somehow makes this assumption that what we see as a capability of technology is static, and then we adapt to that static kind of reality, which of course we know is not the case. So I think we will have to account for adaptation increasingly lagging behind, or not, like some adaptation will be kind of on spot, and then the more and more actors will start lagging behind, and that will be, I think, also a one very significant impact that will transform from technology to society, because of course the ones that can and will have a very different options and probabilities. I think what you mentioned on these kind of agent um, internet being pretty much an AI agent thing rather than human, I think that is, I do agree. I'm not quite sure whether the 3 year time frame, because I think one factor I would say to all of this is technology moves fast. Human adaptability to that is at the same pace. So in some cases where you need a more universal adoption of the particular technology, which is, I think, one of those, it might take more time than the technology suggests available. So I think that is where we kind of uh, we have to factor in the way still we are. But obviously, I think the world you describe, we're kind of, there will be world of humans and world of people that are becoming and resembling more the cyborgs of the science fiction. And that also kind of a bit of a interesting and disturbing question. Also, I found very interesting to hear your kind of talk about AI agents and how they'll do more of the thing. But when previously you discussed what we should do, you said we have to have more human scientists, more human attention, and etc. Did I pick up a bias here? Do we really have in 3 4 years humans that do these things, or there will be these AI agents that we will just guide in these directions and eventually trust them the work to do the work?
It's a great question. I think yes, I think we will move towards a future where we direct AI systems to perform different tasks. So yes, you were right to correct me there. Humans will hopefully be involved in that assembly line at some point, but our relationship to it does change, right? So we become a system that directs a series of other systems. And that's a profoundly different skill set, right? Directing a series of supercomputers. And then the question becomes, what are you asking them to do? And do we have the judgment skills to evaluate their work? So I think that that is a quite a different type of future, but I think it's the inevitable one that we're moving towards. Um, and you had also mentioned, so you think that the agent infrastructure is probably going to take a little bit more time, but we are probably inevitably going there. What I think is interesting, though, is all of the things that we are discussing show that the future doesn't have to be a surprise. If you're willing to engage with it, if you're willing to confront the possibilities, you do have time to prepare. When we feel like we've woken up to the future, that's actually because we've chosen not to see it. Because all of the things that we're talking about, some of the exciting parts of the future, some of the more daunting parts of it, it's because we've gone to the edge to see what could be possible. So anytime we're entirely surprised by the future, it means we chose not to see all of the patents that are being filed, not to follow the capital flows. No, you can't predict the future, but it's also not entirely a surprise. So I think both of those things become true.
But isn't that a bit of a paradox? I think this cognitive bias of blocking out things just because by accepting them, it makes living much more difficult, much more complex and complicated. So as this technology kind of evolves and we keep, getting not being prepared for what is coming, we'll have more and more people actually, choosing or inadvertently actually trying to block out the future because that's a psychological defense mechanism. And that is, in a way, also, I think, and now going back to the information space and to the kind of cognitive warfare, also something that we have to account for, that there will be responses. And also, one thing I don't think we really talked about because we're kind of more looking in this AI was an assumption it's just like digital and synthetic, but I think also in this time frame we start to see emerging robotic systems that are physical robotic systems that are enabled with AI, and some of these assumptions of some skill set that will be persistent, um, probably not being as persistent as we imagine, and that probably also will have a rather foundational effect. Certainly, I think from all of this discussion, I have the sense that, of course, we started as the information space, but we ended up just enlarging because for human and information, all of these things I think are relevant. But I think, at least for me, it just once again stressed the importance, even if we got some things wrong, even if we're like timelines are not exactly probably we're kind of overhyping the technology. But I think it is inevitably clear that that change is coming, and psychological defense mechanisms blocking it out is not going to work. So we have to really do something about it and try to find a way how we convince everyone. What is your final take, Sinead?
And speaking of the things that we also didn't fully touch on, the emotional role AI could play in this environment. And we have to take very seriously the relationships people are going to form with these AI systems and what that means for susceptibility to influence. The more dependent you become on anything, the more vulnerable you are to that system, to that entity. And we're already starting to see in the data, 1 in 4 young people thinking that AI is a better listener, and all of these types of statistics that are quite alarming. But that is also a future scenario, not just that people are in intimate relationships with AI systems, but they are very, very emotionally dependent on them. So I think I'd say my final piece of my final takeaway or kind of insight is that the future, none of it is inevitable. And the report also alludes to this, right? So just because you can see plausible scenarios, it doesn't mean that they're set in stone. We have agency in the decisions that are making now. The future hasn't happened yet, but it is being decided in the same moments. So again, the more we're willing to confront what could be possible, the more we're willing to take a longer term view. This is a general purpose technology. It is going to continue to impact and transform society over multiple decades, and we have to be willing to follow it with our plans and with our scenarios. The better equipped we will be, regardless of which way the future goes. The more you confront it, the more prepared you are, even if it's something that seems unforeseen when it arrives. What would be your final takeaway?
Well, my final takeaway is that I liked your optimistic wrap up of the thing. And I think you're actually absolutely right. We have agency. Well, collective us, let's put it this way. We have agency in that. And these are choices that we make today that determine the future that we'll have. And it's always been that way. It's just the time is compressed and the change is so vast and so dynamic that we have to step up to what is coming rather than apply the normal way we would operate and address these changes. So I think we hope more people engage in this conversation and more people start thinking what is in my line of work, what can I do, is to make the positive scenario outcome more likely than the others.
Mhm. I
Okay, I
agree.
think that will wrap up our, well, probably not that short conversation, taking out us to all different kind of places, right, Alina? Your
I think
mic.
you're on mute, perhaps.
Yes, see, I'm so bad with technology. No, this was super exciting, and I can show you what I've been doing all this time. You will understand now why I can't unmute my mic. See, I'm proper old school. I was taking notes. This discussion has been recorded and it will be available on our social media channels. So if you feel you missed something or you couldn't tune in on time, then you can revisit it. I'll give a super short wrap up of the key points that I put down. First one is about neurotechnology, not sci-fi. It's already here with wearable devices, etc., etc. We can actually safeguard democracy through anticipatory governance. And we importantly need to declare what is the vision of the positive future, what do we want, what is the optimistic vision, and how do we get there where technology is not a threat to democracy, but it can strengthen our democracy. Policymakers were very politely advised to focus less on conserving the present, but thinking more about future and long term. And short-term approach, as we know, does not deliver, long-term decisions apparently are taken elsewhere, not necessarily by our elected officials as far as technology and innovation is concerned. So we have to invest in alternatives that we want to see, but we can only do it if we create favorable environments where we can have experimentation, innovation, and also we have to be more brave in terms of risk-taking. Of course, infrastructure, what parts we actually own, control, etc. Regulation, currently slow and tedious, needs major shift in thinking in that area. And what about the future? As Shini outlined, simulated combination of different environments. We have to look out for agentic infrastructure, maybe future where we direct AI ecosystems, but what is super important that none of that is carved in stone. So if we act now, we can change the future and make it the way we want it to be. So on that happy note, thank you so much to Shini, to Yanis for having this conversation. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, and hope to see some of you in Munich next week. Bye-bye.
Right.